show you some of their research projects they've been working on literally this semester. So what these two students you're seeing, they completed this in actually less than 8 weeks. So I'm very proud of them, and they're going to get up here and rock it. So I'm going to introduce the first student. Her name is Aleece Harmon.
Testing? Okay. Hello everybody, my name is Aleece Harmon. I am presenting my innovation project, my genetic simulator that I made this semester. A little bit about myself. Again, my name is Aleece Harmon. I'm an experienced game designer with more than 5 years of experience working on various games and projects. I earned my associates at Wake Tech, and currently I am currently I am studying at William Peace, working towards my bachelor's. The assignment that we were given that this project is for was called the Innovation Project. And we had a few criteria that we needed to meet in order to do this project successfully. The first criteria is that we needed to define a focus area that we wanted to improve on. And for me, I chose to focus on character modeling and animation. Because up to this point in this project, I hadn't had much experience working with character modeling and doing animation, so I wanted some experience with that. The second thing that we needed to do was create an application of this focus area and do it in a new and creative way. This is the innovation part. I chose to go with a genetic simulator because having multiple characters would give me a lot of opportunity to showcase this character modeling, design, and animation that I wanted to focus on. And lastly, we only had 8 weeks to create this project. Oh no. So a little bit more about my genetic simulator. My goal was to create an application that teaches the basics of genetics in a simple and visually appealing way. I needed to answer what factors go into creating this simulation, and I really wanted to include real-world genetics. Well, slightly real-world. I had to take some creative liberties here and there. I wanted to have genes that represent physical traits. I wanted to follow logical breeding rules, and obviously I needed some characters to visualize these traits. Moving forward, I needed to do research, and if any of you have been to 7th grade biology, you'll be familiar with Punnett squares. I needed to do a lot of research on how they work and how the genes work together in real-world biology. And here's some fun vocab. Genotypes are the combination of dominant and recessive traits. Dominant and recessive traits are represented by capital and lowercase letters, heterozygous traits, and homozygous traits. Through my research, I was able to find out a little bit more about this man here, Mendel, and his research in genetics. He pioneered the terms that we use today, and many of his genetic tests were done on pea plants. So I decided to go with a vegetable theme for my game. So here are some examples of the characters that I have designed for this game, and here are their genotypes. These 3 characters are the ones that the player would be able to start with and breed together in order to create new variations. Here are a little bit more about what their genotypes would do in the simulation. The dominant traits would indicate the character's shapes, while the recessive traits would indicate the character's colors. Through these combinations, I mapped out what each of the different combinations of genotypes would do in a simulation. We have when 2 parents are bred together and created offspring. When 2 matching traits of the same type are created, you have characters that look very similar to the original 3. When you have 2 different traits of the same type, both dominant or both recessive, you have ones that are a combination of the characters, so a half potato, half carrot, or a half beet, half potato. And then finally, 1 dominant and 1 recessive trait yields characters that look like one character but are colored like a separate one. We can better visualize this back to the Punnett squares examples by having 2 parents and then their possible offspring there. And through combinations of all the different characters, that are 232 possible combinations that exist. Now, with all of that out of the way, I can move into a video demonstrating how this all works in a gameplay environment. Go to YouTube for that one. Here you can see me selecting characters that can be bred together. Here is a little information about the game in the UI menus. But the gameplay is you click on two characters and you can breed them together, and it randomly creates a child based on their genotypes. You can do this with any two characters in the game. And while this video plays, I'd like to open the floor up for maybe one or two questions. Yeah, go ahead. Actually, yeah, that was the plan for me developing this. I thought it would be a really great tool for teaching Punnett squares and being able to visualize them. Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about the generative component? Because I'm guessing you have to make the simulation generate a new model from the two different pieces itself. I'm curious about how that actually works.
Oh, of course. I actually have 21, since there's 21 different combinations, I just made 21 separate models. Most of them are the same with slight color variations, but I made 21 separate models, and the code that I have, when two parents are selected, it checks which ones are selected, and then it has a list of the 4 possible children that come out. So it's not technically generated when they're clicked on, but it kind of looks that way, so it works. All right, maybe one more question, if we have one. Okay. Anyways, thank you for your time. If you are interested in playing this game, make sure to come to the William Peace booth later today. And if you're interested in any more work that I've done, there's a QR code for my portfolio.
Thank you, Aleece. Great work. I'm going to introduce the next student who also has been working really hard on this project as well. His name is Nathan Lembo.
All right. Okay, that's working. Thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see so many people here interested. My name is Nathan Lembo. I am an undergraduate at William Peace University. I graduated from Wake Tech Community College with an associate's in applied science and simulation game development. And my presentation is going to be on education in video games and how to integrate it into the educational process. My primary focus is gameplay programming, so I was curious as how to apply different aspects of gamification to different subjects, whether they be more math-based or more text-based, and how to kind of like narrow it down to focus more on symbolism and more interactive gameplay. One of the primary things and models I followed was learn through interaction and test through challenge. So often in education, we present students with information and then test them with quizzes and whatnot. And I want to make that more fun and interactive, so I thought to teach the student through the interaction of objects throughout the game world and to test them through puzzles whose solutions would come from those objects. I looked into some previous titles, such as Oregon Trail, which used historical references and promotes problem-solving challenges. Assassin's Creed series, which uses historically created accurate environments and integration of historical figures and stories. Minecraft, which actually is a sandbox game and even created later on an education development version of it for educators. And Big Brain Academy, which It's a cutesy game to like challenge mental learning and improve those kinds of things. One of the biggest challenges was picking a subject and the target audience. Different age groups require different levels of challenge and different approaches to them. And then designing environments based on those subjects of focus. I wanted to target key aspects of the subject and use various means of information gathering and applying it to 2 puzzles. So I decided to choose classical Rome and then pick the Pompeii area. So this is, the level will be themed around the ruins or outskirts of Pompeii. I looked at several photos of Pompeii and the ruins and the landscape, and I decided on creating 3 main areas, which would be a villa, a temple, and a gladiatorial training field. And here's just some reference images I got from the Pompeii website, an exhibit, and Khan Academy. And here are some models I created. I'm a programmer first, but I really wanted to go into environmental design, so I created a lot of modular props to create the different areas, and I also did a bunch of material noting in Unreal 4 to create like the movement of the grass and the trees, and for the grass to actually take color variation from the ground material that it was on. And this is my level environment. I'm going to show it off here. And again, I used a lot of images and references from the Pompeii ruins. I looked at aerial photos and whatnot, trying to get like a feel for the grass, the trees, the layout of the environment. This first one is the Roman villa. I used a kind of like a marble white and black tiling for the flooring, and I created columns and like awnings. And I also have like a little garden in the center with bushes and a fountain of water. One of the biggest inspirations for this was the fact that prior to going to simulation game design, I was interested in learning history and like teaching history even. So I kind of used games as a way to feel that former kind of wish. So I'm going to just move a little bit ahead here. We're going to go to the gladiatorial, we'll go to the temple actually, I think. And here I recreate this temple. There's a temple of Apollo in Pompeii, and I took there's some brief pictures of it, and I took inspiration from those pictures to kind of create this ruined, kind of collapsed temple area. And I'm just exploring some of the environment around the area. So there's some water. I was playing with a lot with Unreal 4's level designer and their water system. And here's the gladiatorial arena. So I added a lot of wall variations and like flooring variations to add like levels of damage to the different areas. For puzzles, I actually set up a different puzzle for each different area. So
from the very beginning on, you have this automatic material to create a landscape in minutes. We will go through the.
sorry about that. So for each different area, I had a different puzzle interaction. So for the Roman villa, I had these stone blocks that had different Roman numerals on them. And the goal was to teach the player like the different Roman numerals. So this was more targeted towards a younger audience, this specific puzzle. And so there's like an object in crash where they can pick up the object, look at it, inspect it. And it's just to like encourage them to interact with objects and learn while also playing the game. So the player will enter through this area right here, and they'll look at the tiles like, oh, is that similar? Is it different? And we'll kind of push those around. And the tiles will light up. They'll go darker black or green depending on if they're correct, and if they're incorrect, they'll like turn a dark red. And one of the things I wanted to make with these puzzles was that the player can constantly interact with them, so even if they get it correct, they could like move them around still, so it's not just locked in place. So they can constantly play around with them and that sort of thing. For the temple puzzle, I went with a pickup and inspection. So this uses a mixture of text and symbolism. So they'll be able to read a little bit about the different relics, the different deities of the pantheon. And this is the Roman pantheon specifically. So this is like for Vulcan, and this is like his smithing hammer. And basically they can like look around, they can see the different altars. I have some images on them, some titles for the deity and that sort of stuff. And it's kind of just give them hints. You kind of like experience that. So, me inspecting my models because I'm really proud of all of them. But I really wanted to go for a lot of symbolism and imagery here. So that was like one of the big things I had to focus on was how do I not only make these puzzles, but how do I make them easy to kind of, or at least fair enough to figure out with the information I was giving the player. And going around like, oh, I can't place these here. There we go. And the final puzzle, I tried to do a platformer, obstacle puzzle. And each of these banners has a different symbol on it from the Roman Legion, and there's some text information for the banner itself of like what the Legion was about. And each one of the platforms that the player will be jumping on, some of them have false, like fake symbols of legions, while others have the real one. And so you tell which one to jump on based on the platform symbol. So I looked at it, I'm like, oh, look at that. I go over there, I'm like, oh, it's the same. So a lot of different challenges I was testing out. I wanted to feel like what was the most fun, what was the most challenging, how can I incorporate different kind of play styles into puzzles and learning. I'm a little practiced at this one. Did it in one go. I was like, yes. Just looking around the environment. So opportunity ways. So game development and education is something that the game industry has been doing for a long time with simulations and virtual environments. But I think now with the pandemic and how classrooms have kind of been disrupted from it, this just shows further how accessible games and virtual environments can create for teachers and students to interact with one another. Overall, I think there's a lot of opportunities for both arts and programming, and also to interact with experts in those fields. And that's pretty much it. So if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to ask me now, or I'll be at the. So 2 questions, 2 minutes. Okay. So if anyone has like maybe 1 or 2 questions, possible.
How long did it take to create all that?
It took me about 4 weeks to do a lot of the programming, and then an additional 4 weeks to do a lot of the modeling. And then in between that, I was doing a lot of the research, so I was filling in between that time. So we had those 8 to 7 weeks to create this project. So it was a lot to do by myself, but I learned a lot.
Could you pick another location for the Belmas for
I would love to do like the Library of Alexandria before it was burned down, or even like the Parthenon at Athens. That would be like really cool, just these historic areas, bring it back to life. Yes?
What game inspired you?
I was really inspired by the Tales of Overdent. It was a big one. It was a puzzle game where you interacted with different objects and start to tell a story and a narrative. So that was one of the biggest ones. And then obviously a lot of those point-and-click adventure games like Nancy Drew and everything like that.
Interesting.
That's everything. Thank you all for listening to me.
echo the room in saying how tremendously exciting it is to see what you can accomplish in 8 weeks. It's really remarkable. If you weren't here for the earlier session, I'm Augustus Wendell, Assistant Professor of the Practice at Duke University in the Department of Art History, and Visual Studies, and also a core member of the Computational Media Arts and Cultures faculty. And I'm here to introduce, the two of you want to come up here? To introduce two undergraduates. We're going to show some work that they've been completing. One project in process, one project that's completed. And the course that this is all for is called Constructing Virtual Immersive Worlds. And I think our program is quite a bit different than the other schools here in that we're a liberal arts kind of college, or we're situated in the liberal arts college. So this is in many ways maybe the first and hopefully not only exposure to gaming and computational media and immersion, but it's not built on the backbone of a sequence of courses. So so the first speaker is Noelle Garrick, who's going to show some work on a project that both you and Jeffrey are working on, correct?
Correct.
Hey, can everyone hear me okay? Good. All right, hello. I am going to be presenting today on the work of myself and my colleague in our final project. We've been working on this for the past maybe 4 weeks, and we are planning to fully flesh it out for the final, so we're really excited. Sorry, I'm trying to get my timer correct. Okay. So the rationale or the story behind this project is we wanted to create a sort of coastal laboratory setting. We wanted to situate this sort of like remote building that's on the edge of a city that's supposed to be ravaged by a plague. So it's sort of contained, but we want to convey a sense of a broader world out there through the contextual elements in the models that we're going to be using. So the user is put in the role of a scientist that's going to be tasked with investigating a creature that could hold the key to a cure for the city that's ravaged by plague. So, we have to kind of throw the user into this environment, communicate really quickly that, you have a very important role in the context of the city, you have a very important role in relation to what is going on in the problem of this world. And so the interactivity for you as the user will be composed of a lot of levers and buttons around the space that can trigger these different audio and animation sequences related to your work as a scientist in relation to trying to develop a cure from this creature. And that is the intended goal, even though not all of that will be presented in this presentation today. So I'm going to be presenting basically the assets that I have been developing for this scene, and I'm going to explain them a little bit about the process for designing them, and then their intended function within the scene with reference to trying to contextualize and world build and set the atmosphere and the problem for this world. So we open up on this sort of coastal laboratory setting. You can see a sort of set of circular stairs, a giant capsule, a couple of capsules in the foreground and background, some tables around. The user will actually start off at the top of this stairs, so you're going to be kind of seeing the initial view will be from this bottom picture, will be your initial view, and then after you go down the stairs, you will kind of be set more in the context of this top picture. So that's sort of the progression. The first model that I want to highlight is the control panel, because a lot of interactivity will be contained within it. Designing this was sort of I designed it from a modular system, so I designed the levers, I designed a lot of the gears and the circular components, and then I essentially scaled and duplicated them and put them all together as one object that I plan to texture and include as part of it. The levers will be grabbable in this will be a VR project, so you'll be able to see this in a 3D environment. You will have hand controls, and you'll be able to grab the levers and sort of pull them to trigger different things in the scene. And the intended functions of this will be things like being able to maybe turn gears, activate wires, do different things to the creatures within the capsules, and sort of see how your actions affect the world in that particular way. The intended purpose of this is for it to be a sort of ethical dilemma, because you're not sure if the actions that you're performing initially are going to have positive or negative effects. You're not sure if the thing that you're doing is going to lead to anything beneficial, and therefore it is supposed to be a conflict within the user on which types of actions do I take or not take in order to get this desired outcome, if it will even come at all. The second piece that I want to highlight as an asset is the radio, which will be textured shortly. And the radio is a very key element within the scene because it is going to be the thing that plays a role in really contextualizing the story of this environment. You know, a lot of what we're telling is having to be told through audio and through visuals that, you know, you can't directly see except for maybe through windows. You're contained within this one room. So there will be different audios sort of about, you know, like for example, a mother and the way that the plague is affecting her family, or a animal rights group and how they feel about the fact that you're doing research and animal testing, or just a newscaster telling maybe the death toll of the day or how the city is faring. And so these are meant to sort of give you a sense of the broader context out there and how you are, you know, doing something that's very controversial and seen by many different perspectives as either good or bad. And so, you know, it creates emotional reaction of how do you feel about that? Like, how does that affect your actions within this world? The next model I want to highlight is the capsule. There are a total of 5 of them in this room. There are going to be 4 that are sort of closer to the perimeter, closer to the back wall, and they are going to contain in the future different states of the creature that you are working on. So there might be different mutated versions of the central creature that is then a model of it is also contained in the central capsule that was around the stairs previously, so the larger capsule, which is going to be the main focal point in the creature that you're working on. So part of the key notion of these capsules and what they contain is they're supposed to look a little bit industrial, like, you know, be a way of showing the, like separating you from this animal, but at the same time making it feel kind of clinical, like induces a sort of power structure within there, and it's sort of dynamic of where you know, feel a little bit of a curiosity, but also maybe a little bit of a remorse at the fact that you're keeping this thing in captivity. And it also induces a sense of time with the creatures that are contained in it because of the fact that there's going to be creatures shown in different mutated states, so you can kind of see it through the other elements in the room that will explain that you've been working on this. You can kind of see it as, oh, these are previous states, so I've been working on this for a while, like these are previous potentially failed experiments or things that will be worked on in the future. And so in that way, it sort of gives a sense of scale to your work and the implications of it. Another model I want to highlight is the table. This is modeled after sort of a more like antique furniture look. We wanted to give this a steampunk vibe to the lab, and steampunk kind of, it conveys industrial revolution. It's a little bit more, not like in our modern context, but yet at the same time it has a very mechanized effect to it. So, you know, it's more rough, it's more, I guess, bohemian in the sense that, you know, you don't have all of the functionalities of our current world, but yet you have a lot of the rugged innovation and just rapid growth that's happening during the time period. And a lot of that was conveyed just through the materials that were used and the sort of designs of them, this sense of being, you know, having a solidarity, but at the same time a sort of primitive quality compared with the context of our current world and a lot of the materials that we use now. So the goal of this was to kind of emulate that sort of aesthetic of a older variation of something that we use today, but something that's still solid and sturdy and has a use to it that is still present. And the objects on top of it are also just some things to sort of populate it and show how it is used and just, you know, keep it from being just a blank slate with that doesn't really have any sort of interactivity or seems like it doesn't have any usage in the environment. In those ways, it's kind of blending in with the rest of the scene. The last model that I want to highlight is the filing cabinet, which will be something that you can pull out, and when you do, it should trigger documents to appear on your screen that are readable. This is similar to the radio, is going to be a model that is used for contextualization, you know, something to populate the scene to show like where certain documents are being held. And similar to the capsules, this one is going to also contain documents that give a sense of context to the scene, the sense that you've been working on this for a while. This says you've been working on this for a while in the sense that your work has certain implications and maybe even a sense of identity of yourself in the role of this user, because the notes will ultimately have a certain tone to them, and it's impossible for you not to start developing a sense of identity, or at least constructing an identity from these documents. All in all, that is what I wanted to present today, and I guess I can entertain any questions if we have time, although I'm not sure if that's necessary. But yeah, thank you.
I have one quick question if there isn't another. This moral dilemma of, if I understand it correctly, there will be a creature, we are somehow operating on it, there's a power dynamic. How are you planning on dealing with the issue that some users may, I don't want to say enjoy that process, but like, how do you manage it? That you're enabling someone to have an affect on another object, on another creature? Like, what sort of constructions are you thinking around that to guard against certain behaviors?
So you're referring to guard against people having like sadistic tendencies about acting upon it?
I'm just wondering. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I was clarifying. I think that, okay, so, I mean, in some cases that would be, I'm not going to say useful, but part of the contextualization is showing that by acting upon this, you are potentially developing a cure that could be useful towards people. So ultimately, it's impossible for the action to not at least have some scientific benefit. Ultimately, you know, you're trying to create a standardized environment, but you can't dictate how ultimately how a user is going to behave. I mean, if a user gets emotional benefit from that sort of action, then I'm not going to call that a success, but I'm glad that they're gaining something from it in that way. I think that ultimately, with more development, it's possible that you could provide some variation where, for example, if they start going overboard with their actions, then maybe you could induce more audios from the animal rights group role that sort of, or some sort of implication that shows a negative downside of, you know, doing some needless harm more than is necessary. Oh gosh. I guess I'll go with the guy in the front.
Was there any like process, like do you find that you enjoy any specific like model, design, interaction?
Oh gosh, yes. I'm a sophomore, and I originally came to Duke wanting to do kind of VR stuff, but I recognized that it was a little bit, like the design programs are a little bit underutilized at times just in terms of this work. It's so new at Duke, and it's really nice to see it growing, but I love modeling. Like, I love the process of it. I'm enamored by other people doing it, by seeing all of your guys' work. Like, it's just so energizing to me. And so being able to present this and being able to finally find a class that really allows me to grow in my potential, that like, yes, no, I love making these models. And I really think that I've just learned a lot over the course of these weeks of having to, you know, make a lot of mistakes and do things unnecessarily, especially, you know, you start making making little details that you don't need to make until you learn like the beauties of texturing and how to do things in more easy ways. But yeah, it's been a really great process learning all of this. Oh, one more in the back, I guess, if we have time, sorry. Yeah, definitely. I feel like I kind of didn't emphasize that enough, but it's currently being developed in VR. These screenshots were just through the Unity view, but it is launchable. It does have the XR toolkit implemented, so it can be looked at, and it does look quite good with the lighting and the atmospheric effects, having it in the VR setting. And with that, thank you so much for your questions, and
Thank you, Noelle. So our next speaker is Jeffery Hwang, who's going to be showing a short lab project from earlier in this semester. Students were tasked with exploring a very particular part on Duke's campus, a garden space adjacent to the main West campus, and to use some rather off-the-shelf augmented reality tools to engage within a dialogue with that space.
Hi everyone. So today I'll be talking about my augmented reality project called Interrogation. So as Professor Wendell explained beforehand, I made this for a quick, probably 2-week AR lab as a part of our immersive virtual worlds class, where we're learning how to model and we just create these immersive virtual experiences. So my project orientation aims to really critique the cultural appropriation occurring at the CRP Duke Gardens that most people actually overlook because we don't know much about the history of the area. So first, we're assigned to select an area, and then we would basically create a model that illuminates either a hidden idea or would critique a predominant school of thought in that site that the AR experience would take place. So thus, I chose the CRP Duke Garden, but to be more specific, I chose the Asiatic Arboretum, which is one of the few sections of the CRP Duke Gardens. Then specifically, I chose to assign my model and place it right in front of this Japanese architectural style moon bridge, which is located right there, like between these 2 lakes in the area. So the reason I chose the Asiatic Arboretum was because I noticed this incongruency between gardening philosophies. So if you are able to go to this Asiatic Arboretum, you would realize that it almost presents, it boasts itself as this collection of like exotic Asian flora, plant life that you wouldn't be able to really access, at least in America, let alone in the South and North Carolina. So when you walk in, you see swimming pool, Asiatic, East Asian plants, and also it's a class with a lot of Asiatic and just East Asian architecture. Some of them from Japan, some of them from South Korea. However, when you really examine the history of it and look at the gardening philosophies, it actually isn't an authentic representation of Asian gardening practices. So if you look back a few decades, the way they created the CRP Duke Gardens was actually by bulldozing down several acres of the forest by the Duke University. However, this doesn't match Eastern gardening philosophy. So in Western gardening philosophy, humans are basically tasked and encouraged to really mold their natural landscape and resources around them to create a product they desire, that they want. Meanwhile, for Eastern gardening philosophies, the gardener is really encouraged to really work with the land and really create gardens that really mimic and also are inspired by already existent natural landscapes. So I wanted to create a modern experience that really focuses on a theme that it's trying to be something that actually isn't. So thus, I went through an extensive prototype process. I went between different models that were more overt in nature, but I decided to focus on a torii gate, which was more discreet, which I'll explain later in relation to the site. So I used Autodesk Maya to create a model of this gate and also texture it, and then I used Adobe Aero so users can project it onto the site. And for some historical contextualization of the torii gate, it's actually a traditional Japanese gate that is entrance to sacred Shinto grounds in Japan. So when users first open the app, they're tasked to walk in front of this East Asian moon bridge, which is the red bridge behind my model, and then they're tasked to place it and then step back a few steps onto the stairs that are not visible in the picture. And then when they look out at first glance, it's really visually coherent. The red of the model is cohesive with the bridge and also architecturally as well. So almost it seems as if it's kind of like a fantastical like tourist experience. So people want to go up to it, take pictures of it. However, when you really interrogate the historical contextualization of it, you realize there's something deeper in this. You start questioning your own enjoyment of it. And as mentioned before, this is actually an entrance to sacred Shinto grounds. However, in this case, it's actually just kind of a tourist-like gateway to another part of the gardens. So you're enjoying this piece, but at the same time you realize this whole space actually isn't authentic. It's actually an inauthentic experience, inauthentic representation of Asian gardening culture that was made more palatable for more American Western audiences. And just through creating this process, through creating this whole experience, I learned so much about Asian gardening culture, and I was able to cultivate and really integrate my background and interest in environmental science and art, and I hope this project will really just lead me into more tasks and also just experiences in landscape architecture. and I can entertain a few questions, but thank you for listening. Yes.
So I thought it was really spectacular, the depth of understanding that you're really trying to apply. And so I know that it was a small project, but how would you connect that to a user before they're, so you know, sort of set the frame of that before they go in?
So for the sake of this project, I would have actually had to be with the user and really first let them experience the AR experience and then break it down for them. However, if I were to really expand this project, I'd probably add an audio component and probably play in. So maybe while they're looking at this, they kind of get like a historical walkthrough of what I just mentioned before about the contradictions of like Western and Eastern gardening philosophy. And then after experiencing this AR experience, walking through this whole arboretum, they'll probably start questioning what they enjoy, if it's ethical, and is it really culturally coherent.
Could you see this used in like future like tours of like spaces and environments to like have tour guides and have people kind of placing objects around, kind of building out an environment like that, trying to learn about that?
Yeah, of course. I'm actually taking a gentrification class right now, so I guess the issue of authenticity is really predominant in communities trying to really preserve their culture, their local areas. And I think by using technology like AR, a lot of the incoming outsiders can actually start learning more about local culture and start, I guess, interrogating their own ethical impact on their local communities. So I think it's a really good way to start spurring like social interrogation and also just like reflecting more on our actions in society. Thank you for listening.
Right, so give me a second to get my laptop set up, but I can kind of talk about my students while I do this. I think it's really appropriate for Wake Tech to go last. If you were kind of paying attention, you might have noticed that a lot of the bachelor's and even a master's student got their start at Wake Tech. So it's been, yeah, we even have a bunch of Wake Tech professors in the audience here to support our students. So it's really awesome to see that our students do flourish after Wake Tech, and we have been able to push them pretty far. So give me one moment. What my students, and these aren't just my students, I did teach them some of the classes that they did need in order to do this project, because this is an internal internship that was funded through an NSF grant that they participated in. But I taught them to the classes that they needed, tech, art, and photogrammetry, but Miss Aisha is in the audience, who was their faculty mentor on this, so I don't want to take full credit for this. So she is here supporting them, but I'll let them introduce themselves and yes.
Is there some music? The projector seems to be playing some music. Is there some background music?
It shouldn't be. Oh, is it? Sorry, it unmuted itself when I plugged it in. Thank you. You both can come up, and the mouse is right here, and if you want to show the simulation afterwards, just want to actually exit out of the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Anthony Parisi,
And I'm Chapin Reil.
and together we worked on a project where we created a plating simulator for the Wake Tech Culinary Department. And none of this would have been possible without the funding from the National Science Foundation. They gave our school a grant which not only provided funding for the project development itself, but also for the photogrammetry and the tech art classes that made this possible.
So who are we? As we've said, we're Wake Tech simulation and game development students. And we were tasked with this project along with 3 other students who worked on the project to make a plating simulation for the culinary department at Wake Tech. This is a screenshot of sort of the opening menu of our simulation. So the goal of the simulation was to provide the culinary arts students with a tool to practice the plating for the Baking 2 class. And because this was an educational tool that was utilizing sort of real-world applications, we needed high-quality assets that accurately represented the different garnishes, desserts that students would be using. We needed to target an accessible platform, which for this project we chose a browser, so we used a Unity WebGL build. We needed to include enough options and variety for the students to use, and we needed to complete the project by our target date.
So why do we use photogrammetry? Well, as you can tell by this example here, organic objects can sometimes be very difficult and time-consuming to reproduce through traditional modeling and material methods. Not only that, but we had a very short deadline with 5 full-time students and part-time developers. So this is sort of the best of both worlds. Photogrammetry allowed us not only to get good, realistic-looking models and materials, but it also allowed us to save time. With that being said, we could not process all 50 to 60 different models that we were going to include in games, so we chose to only use photogrammetry for the main dessert items, because those other objects like the garnishes and sauces we could reproduce through traditional methods. Here's an example of a photo shoot, a typical photogrammetry photo shoot with our Professor Amber demonstrating. Ours was very similar to this. It's typically 2 lights. You have a key light and a fill light, and then you have at least 1 camera, and typically this is done on a turntable when you're using the void method with the black backdrop, just to get any of the background out of the equation when you go to compute this. This is an example of what our photo shoots would look like. It's a turntable down here, some wax paper to keep stuff from getting sticky, and then the desserts provided by the culinary department. Once all the photos are taken, you throw it into reality capture in our case, and it computes all the data. That gives you a high poly mesh in which you clean up and you remove any of the background or the turntable from it. And you also get a very detailed color map from that process. There's an example of one of the actual photos that was processed, and this is an example after the bottom was removed from the equation in reality capture. So if you know by the, I don't know if you can see the poly count up there, but the original high poly model is up on the right there, and it's extremely, extremely high poly, and that's after bringing it down. When you're in reality capture, it's millions of faces, and this is brought down to about 200,000, 100,000. And then here's an example of a low poly. This one was triangulated, just as an example, and that's a factor of 10, more than a factor of 10 rather, lower than what the original was. And targeting WebGL, again, you don't want to go too high poly. Now here's an example of another one. This is all quad workflow, and that's better for animated things. None of our desserts were going to be dancing around or anything, but just as an example of proper workflow. Now what do you get from the photogrammetry process? You got a high poly, and then you create the low poly mesh from that. Now on the right, you can see there are a color map and a very detailed normal map that you can extract from the high poly when you bake it to the low poly. That's all you can really get from the photogrammetry process. But using a typical PBR material workflow, you're going to need some more maps, so you have to create these. We use Substance Painter, and you can use your color in your normal map to influence how you create those to speed up the process. And that's what we did. And here's an example of them rendering in WebGL Unity ready to go. So those are game ready and functional.
So for the systems of the project, we knew that each object would contain a lot of different data and information that we needed. We needed to be able to provide the name of the dessert, what different garnishes, plates, sauces was compatible with the dessert, because one of the main points of this project, because it was an educational tool, was to provide feedback. So students can plate, they can have fun sort of experimenting with different things, but then they can also receive feedback to know, oh, this chocolate sauce does not work well with this particular dessert. So we use Unity scriptable objects, which if you're not too familiar, they're sort of containers of data they're flexible, they're easy to change, and that also helped with bug fixing. It allowed fast iteration with our short timeline, and we could quickly add requests from the team for different data types. So here you can see sort of an example for the variance slice. So we had a box in the inspector for the description, the name, we could insert the feedback, prefab there. And this was great because anyone on the team could edit this, and they didn't have to worry about going into the code. And even on the programming side, you didn't have to worry if a team member edited this because it was all sort of handled within the inspector. And it allowed for quick iteration. And it also really helped with the compatibility. So up here on the top, we have one of our Excel sheets for the plate compatibility with the different desserts. Green being good, yellow okay, red bad. And that was really easy to add in the scriptable object. We just had an array for good, okay, and bad feedback, and we could input the different object IDs for what worked and what didn't, and that allowed for easy calculation when the player wanted to receive feedback. And then this is sort of what the finished plate would look like. And if you want, you can also try it yourself at the WakeTech itch page.
Cool. So what we'll do now is we will switch over to the actual simulation itself. And while Chapin designs a couple of plates, I'll answer some questions if we have any questions about desserts in general or just Unity.
I'll go first. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this. What happened to those desserts after you photographed them?
Well, that was kind of one of the benefits of this. We like to joke it was the sweetest job that we ever had, but we had to eat all this because we couldn't let it go to waste. So, yeah, a lot of extras. Yes. So for that, we actually did a lot of prototyping in the beginning phases when we knew we were going to target a WebGL platform. We wanted it to be accessible from any web browser and without any graphics card and stuff. So we did a lot of tests with initial photo scans and just messed around with the poly count, messed around with the texture size, and just kept throwing it up on Itch and just seeing how it worked in just on different platforms and stuff. It's a good question. Yes, all the way in the back. Wow, I can't hear anything.
Oh, those showcase the different placement points. So you can drag an object to that specific area and it will sort of snap in place. And it's just a little way to guide the player. But we also knew that players would want to potentially take screenshots for class or getting feedback from an instructor. So you can easily hide those in the UI and bring them back to continue editing your plate.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Two. One is it seems like most of the decorative sauce elements are more templates. Did you at all experiment with like freehand having drawn?
Yeah. So actually, we did initially want to have a free-form sauce type of thing. However, just due to the complex nature of it and the timeline, yeah, it just wasn't going to be possible. So we did try to, that's actually the one that we have the most of is sauce designs, because we have 5 different sauce types, and then we have several different sauce designs, and we just tried to iterate on that quite a bit. And then second question?
The second question is just, did any particular dessert give you more trouble due to its wetness, reflectiveness, viscosity, melting?
Oh yeah, so actually, about the melting in particular, we did these photo shoots in the kitchen of the culinary department because they would not have made the trip to the photo studio, so we actually moved the photo studio into the kitchen, and we had the culinary instructor pull them out of the freezer, like let us shoot them and then go back into the freezer. For some of them, we had to kind of like throw some flour and stuff on there to get some of the shine away, and I think the hardest one was the fruit galette because it just has very complex shapes, and then in the center it's like gooey fruit stuff. So yeah, that was a lot of fixing later in like Substance Painter and stuff. Nathan?
What was the biggest thing you and your team took away from this kind of client-employee relationship you had?
So that's actually a good question. We had a lot of interfacing with the culinary department because we wanted this to be usable. We didn't want to like do something that we just thought was neat and functional and showed a thing. We wanted them to actually be able to use this. So it was a lot of back and forth, a lot of emailing on what would be effective, what were the key like demonstratable like goals that they wanted us to do, and that's why we ended up settling on what to combine on a plate, the size of a plate versus the size of a dessert, and the combination of flavors. So yeah, it was very interesting, especially coming from a game background where if it's fun, you play it. But having it be functional for an educational space is a completely different thing. So yeah. Cool.
Wait, so to clarify, do people combine things to see how they look, or there's a grading system based on what you combine?
So yeah, actually, if you want to,
quickly.
When we initially designed it, it was to have a system in which they can play and test things out. But one of the things that the client wanted was feedback on how to grade and like basically like to see like how they did. So that's why we have this get feedback section in which, depending on the combination of things in that compatibility chart, you would get feedback on if things are good combinations, if things aren't good combinations, and then it would comment on why those decisions were made. So if you combine the wrong sauce with the type of dessert or something, it would tell you maybe consider a different sauce, like maybe those flavors don't go together, or hey, maybe the plate's too small for how many things you have on there, and stuff like that. So yeah.
I'm actually curious about that process, because this is a field that perhaps you and your team want to experience. So how did you translate and make that customizable for the department to be able to constantly provide that, put that feedback, and perhaps update it if possible?
Yeah, so what we did was a lot of compatibility charts, a lot of research into, we were provided some documentation from the culinary department initially of like the practices and their grading rubric for the plating assignments that they have. And we use those to develop like numerical systems, so we have quantifiable like data. So general size of a dessert versus general size of a plate, we can put numbers to that. The types of flavor of a dessert versus the types of flavor in a garnish, those things we could quantify as well with different values, and then texture as well, which that one was all mind bender of trying to figure out like how to quantify texture differences and how to combine all of that. So yeah, it was just a lot of going back and forth with the culinary department until they were satisfied with the output. For the best number what? Oh, so for points on the plate, right? Is that what we're saying?
For the mesh, like the dessert mesh or the plate?
Oh, okay. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, the optimization of the number of faces on the mesh. Okay, yeah. So that was really just, we tried to get as many faces as we could without seeing any slowdown on just a completely base like laptop with no graphics card, completely integrated like Intel graphics and stuff like that. And the reason why we wanted more faces was because with these organic shapes, if you simplify them too much, it's very apparent, and like we couldn't go super deep with the normal map because technically having a higher resolution texture actually slows down, especially a WebGL platform, more than points does. So having a higher face count and lower resolution texture maps made things load faster and perform more efficiently. So it was really just finding the Goldilocks zone, just playing around and keep uploading it and trying it.
Just to kind of riff off of that, so you put a lot of prioritization on the appearance of the desserts. Was there anything you were like, this really isn't that important, we're going to simplify that or take away from that?
That happened in quite a few places. If we had time to go over our original design doc and then what it looked like completely after the first 2 weeks, a lot of stuff got cut. For example, as mentioned before by one of the previous questions, free design on dessert, on sauces, free design on exactly how many different places that you could place things, and that's why we ended up going with like safety zones for each plate, and then having the students be able to move and rotate and scale things after that. just to simplify how we did the scoring feedback type of system. So a lot of that stuff got scaled back, but we did want to focus on things looking as if they would look in the kitchen so that the students had a good, accurate representation of what they're used to seeing in the kitchen. Cool. Well, thank you all for listening to our speech teacher.
We do have this at our booth. We also have a work in progress one of another group of student interns working with the cybersecurity to do a crime scene, like an interactive crime scene using photogrammetry and all that stuff too. But thank you to my students for presenting. And thank you all for coming. Do you want to wrap up? Okay. Thank you all for attending the undergrad presentations. I hope that you enjoyed it. We, if you want to talk to anybody afterwards, I'm sure the students will stick around for a couple minutes and us professors will stick around, but thank you all.